My name is Hannah Mitchell. I'm 30 years old, and while fireworks were already exploding over the desert sky of Scottsdale, that New Year's Eve, the sharpest spark in my night came from inside my own family's dining room. The chandelier glittered over a table set like a magazine cover, champagne flutes lined up like soldiers' silverware, catching every beam of light, a roast beef steaming at the center. My sister Vanessa leaned back in her velvet chair, eyes gleaming, and pointed straight at me. "You're still poor," she announced, her voice cutting through the chatter. Laughter rolled down both sides of the table like she had just fired a starting gun. Uncles, cousins, even Aunt Sarah, who never laughed at anything, chuckled into their glasses. My father lifted his scotch and added, "At this rate, you'll never even own a place." More laughter. The sound rang against the crystal and walls rehearsed like a cruel tradition. I sat there with my hands folded, my smile quiet, my fork poised just above the plate. They thought my silence was surrender. They thought mocking me was still safe. But in my chest, the words I didn't say were heavier than any insult they had ever thrown. What none of them realized was that midnight was coming, and when the clock struck 12, the tables would turn in a way they could never imagine. The Mitchell family had perfected the art of holiday theater. Our house gleamed from the street fairy lights strung tight along the eaves, the desert palms wrapped in gold bulbs. Inside, Mother insisted everything looked like perfection: polished mahogany tablecloth, napkins folded into swans, the chandelier dripping with crystal. But this wasn't for us. It was for neighbors, fathers, colleagues, the people who still believed the Mitchells sat higher than most. Tonight was no exception. Vanessa, the golden child, was seated at the center like a queen in her mansion's court. She had just closed on a new house in Paradise Valley and made sure every story led back to it. Marble countertops imported from Italy, she gushed, letting her diamond bracelet catch the candlelight. Dad beamed, raising his glass. "That's my girl." My mother dabbed her eyes as if the granite alone proved Vanessa's destiny. I lowered my gaze to the cranberry sauce, dragging my fork through it, painting streaks of red across the porcelain. To them, Vanessa's every purchase was proof of legacy. To me, it looked like favoritism carved into stone. Then came the jokes again, circling back to me. "Hannah," my cousin Heather smirked, "are you still renting that little apartment? You know, the one that could fit in Vanessa's garage?" Chuckles followed. My father leaned back, swirling his drink like he was sealing a verdict. "Your sister's right. You should have gone into finance. Creativity doesn't pay bills." He didn't even glance at me as he said it. The words fell heavy, deliberate. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I held my expression still. They thought silence meant defeat, but to me it meant storage. Each insult tucked away like a stone in my pocket, heavy but useful. The performance was so predictable it almost bored me. Vanessa preened, Dad applauded, Mom whispered concern that sounded more like judgment, and the relatives followed like an obedient choir. But this time one voice cracked the script. Chloe, my younger cousin home from law school in California, shifted in her chair and said softly, "Isn't success measured in more ways than money?" The table froze for a heartbeat. Forks paused, heads turned. My sister barked out a laugh. Only broke people say that, she snapped. Dad nodded with satisfaction. "Exactly. Philosophy doesn't pay bills. Neither does whatever Hannah's doing these days." The sound of my own name stung more than the words. Chloe looked at me, her eyes apologetic, almost pleading, as if she wished she could take them back. She didn't know the full story, not yet. But she recognized cruelty when she heard it. I caught her gaze and gave her a small, deliberate smile. I didn't need her pity. I needed her to know that their words didn't break me. Vanessa wasn't finished. She raised her glass of champagne high, her grin glinting like broken glass. "Some of us climb corporate ladders," she said loudly, making sure her diamond caught the chandelier. "And some of us can't even afford real furniture." The laughter rolled again, sharp as a blade. Aunt Sarah snorted into her napkin. Even Uncle David let out a chuckle. I picked up my wine, let the ruby liquid brush my lips, and set the glass down with calm precision. Then I looked straight at my sister. Just listening, I said. 2 words. That was all. But the shift at the table was real. Vanessa's smile faltered just a touch. My father frowned as if he hadn't expected me to speak at all. For the first time that night, they realized silence could cut sharper than laughter. The conversation scrambled to restart, relieved to return to safer ground. Vanessa launched into another story about her firm's promotion. Dad nodded proudly, Mom adjusted her pearls, and the rest leaned in. But beside me, Chloe whispered under her breath, "Don't let them get to you. They'll regret it one day." I smiled again, but not the practiced smile I'd worn for years. This one was sharper, deliberate, because Chloe was right. They would regret it. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow. But soon. That dinner table wasn't just a stage, it was a mirror reflecting decades of favoritism and betrayal. Every year the same script, Vanessa. The golden sun, me the shadow. When I was 12 and won a statewide art contest, Mom brushed it off with a polite, "That's nice, honey. Maybe next year you'll do something practical." When Vanessa scored high on her SATs, Dad opened champagne, invited neighbors, and toasted as though she had discovered fire. When I showed them a 3D model of our house I'd coded on a hand-me-down computer, Dad muttered, "Cute. But computers are for games. You'll never pay bills with nonsense." Then he shut the door. Years of moments like that layered over each other like sediment, burying me under their judgment. And yet those same layers hardened into something else, resolve. Every insult was fuel. Every dismissal was a reason to keep going. Sitting there that New Year's Eve surrounded by laughter meant to humiliate me, I realized something vital. They thought they were mocking me into silence, but I was sharpening silence into a blade. The chandelier above us cast golden light, making the champagne fizz glow like liquid fire. Vanessa soaked in it, my father orchestrated it. The relatives followed as if applause was oxygen. And me? I sat quietly smiling, faintly feeling the countdown not on the TV, but in my own chest. Midnight was coming, and with it the reckoning. Because the truth was no longer just mine. The world already knew. Only this table, this so-called family, still clung to the old lie that I was poor excluded the failure among them. But lies have a lifespan, and this one was down to its final minutes. So I folded my napkin neatly across my lap, lifted my glass one last time, and whispered inside my head, "Laugh while you can." Because when the clock strikes 12, you'll remember this night for the rest of your lives. I was 12 years old the first time I realized my place in the Mitchell family had already been written for me, and it wasn't the role of the golden child. The night I came home waving a flyer from the state art contest, cheeks flushed with excitement, my drawing of desert canyons had been chosen to hang in the Phoenix Gallery downtown. I still remember bursting into the kitchen, ticket stub clutched tight in my palm, the scent of pot roast heavy in the air. "Mom, look. They picked mine," I said, my voice high, trembling with pride. She barely glanced up from the potatoes she was mashing. "That's nice, Hannah. Maybe next year you'll do something practical." Practical. That single word landed heavier than her sigh, like a leash I didn't know I'd been tethered to. 2 weeks later, Vanessa scored straight A's on her report card, and the entire house transformed into a shrine. Dad framed every page in polished wood, lined the staircase wall with her accomplishments like it was a gallery of its own. Neighbors came over, champagne glasses clinked, and my mother wept tears of joy. My flyer from the gallery tucked into a drawer out of sight. It was clear then one child was the rising sun, the other just a flickering bulb in the background. By 16, the divide had become impossible to ignore. Vanessa made varsity volleyball, and Dad sent invitations for the whole neighborhood to come watch her first game. He bought her new sneakers, cheered from the bleachers so loudly the coach laughed. That same month, I showed him a rough 3D model of our house I'd built on an ancient laptop, every counter and window painstakingly recreated. I thought he'd be impressed. He leaned in for a second, muttered, "Cute. But computers are for games, Hannah. You'll never pay bills with nonsense." Then he shut the door literally and figuratively. I didn't stop. Nights I stayed up with the screen glowing against my face, teaching myself lines of code from forums strangers had posted. My art teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, was the first adult who saw something in me. "You think in systems, Hannah," she told me, her eyes bright, as though she'd found a rare gem. "Don't let anyone shrink that." Her words carried me longer than the dismissals at home. And then there was Jake, the boy next door, who wasn't much older than me but curious enough to sit cross-legged on my floor and put on the VR headset I had cobbled together. He turned his head, saw the park I'd designed, and grinned wide. "This feels like the future, H. Don't stop." But inside my house, my father's voice always thundered louder. I overheard him one night, phone pressed to his ear, his tone certain. "Vanessa's going to carry the Mitchell name forward. Hannah's creative, but she'll land somewhere stable eventually." I froze in the hallway, the words coiling around me like chains. Stable. That's what I was to them. Not brilliant. Not exceptional. Just something that might one day even out enough not to embarrass the family. By senior year of high school, the narrative had calcified. Vanessa's Harvard acceptance letter arrived in a thick envelope, and our living room erupted. Dad popped champagne, Mom wept openly, aunts and uncles called to congratulate. The house pulsed with celebration. That same week, I received an internship offer from a small VR incubator in Phoenix. My hands shook as I showed the letter to Dad. "They think I could really contribute," I whispered. He barely glanced. "Virtual reality. Stop chasing fads, Hannah. Apply to business school like your sister. That's what real success looks like." His tone was final. No applause, no champagne, no neighbors called. Just silence. I folded the letter neatly and tucked it into my journal. Proof that somewhere someone believed in me, even if my family never would. At dinners after that, the pattern repeated itself like clockwork. Dad asked Vanessa about professors and internships. Mom rehearsed her introductions for Vanessa's future colleagues. When I tried to share a prototype I had built, they smiled politely, then cut me off with Hannah's still finding herself. Still finding myself. As though I were a lost object that might one day turn up in a place that finally made sense to them. The staircase wall became my private museum of injustice. Every frame, every photo of Vanessa shining brighter while my achievements lived in shadow. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was woven into the fabric of the house, carved into the very wood of the banister. And while the world might think rivalry begins when careers diverge, mine began in childhood. 2 kids, under the same roof, but treated as though we lived in different universes. I carried their words like stones in my pocket. Heavy? Yes, but they built something solid inside me. I told myself, every time they dismiss you, you're building a layer of armor. Every time they laugh, you're sharpening your edge. Still, armor can't completely dull the sting of family betrayal. On Christmas Eve during my senior year, the house was warm with the smell of ham and cinnamon. Relatives passed gifts, laughter filled every corner. My cousin Chloe got a new car, Vanessa unwrapped designer luggage for Harvard. When I opened my gift, a journal with a floral cover, Mom beamed. "So you can write down your little ideas." Her voice was soft, but it pressed into me like a blade. I held the journal close, smiled politely, and thought, one day these little ideas will be bigger than all your gifts combined. They never asked what I wanted. They assumed. They never believed in what I built. They minimized, laughed, dismissed. But I wasn't crushed. I was gathering. Every laugh at my expense, every remark about being poor or impractical, every dismissal of my work, I stored them all, like oxygen, like fuel. So when I sat at the table that New Year's Eve as an adult, watching Vanessa boast about her new mansion and hearing Dad joke that I'd never own a place, it wasn't just one insult. It was decades of them stacked high. They thought I was shrinking smaller under their spotlight. But the truth, I had been growing wings in the dark, wings they never once bothered to notice. The cranberry sauce streaked red across my plate, candles flickered against the chandelier, and their laughter filled the room. But inside me a voice whispered with certainty, They've written your role since you were a child. Tonight, the script ends. I was 22 when the breaking point came, and it didn't arrive gently. The night smelled of roast chicken and Chardonnay, laughter echoing down the polished hallway as I carried my sketchbook tucked under my arm like a shield. Vanessa had just returned home from Harvard, glowing with stories of professors and internships lined up like pearls on a necklace. Dad was already bragging before she even opened her mouth. "Goldman Sachs," he said, proudly pounding the table so hard the silver rattled. "They've practically guaranteed her future." Mom leaned forward, her pearls catching the chandelier light, nodding so fast I thought her neck might snap. To them, Vanessa wasn't just a daughter, she was the Mitchell legacy carved in marble. When the laughter died down, my palms sweated as I saw the sliver of silence I needed. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. "I'm not applying to business school," I said. Every fork paused midair. My father's knife clanged against the plate, sharp enough to slice the air. "I'm starting my own company. In VR design." The table broke like glass. Dad's face flushed crimson, his voice snapping like a whip. "You're joking." "I'm not," I said, my voice shaking but steady enough. "I've been working on prototypes. It's more than games. It's immersive design. Virtual spaces." Vanessa leaned back, smirk curling across her lips. "So you're betting your whole life on video games?" "It's not a game," I fired back. My hands clenched under the table, nails biting into my palm. "It's the future." Dad slammed his hand against the table, crystal glasses trembling in their stems. "Do you know how humiliating this sounds? Your sister is at Harvard. Your cousins are in law and medicine. And you want to play with toys." Mom reached across her hand, brushing mine with a gentleness sharper than his rage. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "you're embarrassing yourself. People will think we failed as parents." Embarrassing. That word lodged deeper than every laugh, every dismissal. By dessert, the verdict was cold and final. Dad's voice cut through the chatter like steel. "If you walk away from business school, you walk away from our support. No tuition, no allowance, no safety net. You're on your own." Vanessa smirked, wider satisfied. "Good luck paying rent with your little art projects." I wanted to scream, to throw every sketch and prototype across the table, to demand they see me, but my voice came out low even. "Fine. I'll do it alone." That night I packed 2 suitcases, a box of sketchbooks, my battered laptop, and the keys to the Civic Vanessa always mocked. By dawn I was gone. My new home was a shoebox apartment in Tempe. The walls cracked, the carpet smelled faintly of mildew, and the mattress lay on the floor. Roaches scattered when the lights flicked on, and the Civic coughed smoke every time it started. From the outside I looked like the failure they expected. Maybe that gave them comfort. Maybe they gathered around that polished table, shaking their heads, saying, "See, we were right." But inside that dingy apartment another story began. At 2 a.m, while neighbors argued through thin walls, I sat hunched over my laptop, cheap coffee steaming beside me. I coded, I sketched, I tested prototypes no one had asked for. My eyes burned, my wrists ached, but I kept going. 6 months later, I scraped together $50 and signed up for a startup fair in Phoenix. My entire budget bought me a folding table, a flimsy banner printed at a corner shop, and the right to stand shoulder to shoulder with polished booths gleaming under spotlights. I wore my one thrift store blazer, set up my battered laptop, and prayed the Civic wouldn't die on the way. Investors strolled past in expensive shoes, their colognes thick in the air. The first leaned in, headset barely covering his hair gel. 10 seconds later, he chuckled, shook his head. "This looks like a toy, not a business." He didn't even take my card. Another man crossed his arms, tried the headset, lasted 30 seconds, then tossed my flyer back like it was trash. "Nobody pays real money for fake paintings," he scoffed. I smiled politely, but inside I burned. By noon, my booth was invisible. Jake, who had driven down to help, whispered, "Maybe they're right, Hannah. Maybe it's too niche. You could still get an MBA. Join a real company." His words cut not because he meant harm, but because, for a second, I almost believed him. Then she appeared. A woman in her 50s, blazer, crisp shoes, sensible confidence, quiet, but heavy enough to fill the space. She didn't ask questions, she put on the headset. She walked slowly through my gallery, lingered at each sculpture, each surreal landscape I had coded from scratch. Her head tilted, her eyes narrowed as if she could see something no one else had. When she pulled off the headset, her eyes shone. "How much?" she asked. I blinked. "Excuse me, I want to buy this collection. All of it. Name your price." Jake froze. My throat went dry. I had prepared a dozen pitches, but none for this. Somehow I managed to stammer a number that felt impossibly bold. 220,000. She didn't flinch. She nodded. "Send me the paperwork." By the end of that afternoon, the contract was signed. Just like that, my work was no longer theory. It was business. Jake stared at me, mouth open. "You actually sold it." I laughed, shaky adrenaline buzzing in my veins. "Looks like I did." That night, driving home in the Civic that coughed smoke every mile, I didn't call my parents. I didn't text Vanessa. To them, I was still the broke daughter chasing toys, and I wanted to keep it that way. Because the longer they underestimated me, the sweeter the reveal would be. One deal turned into 3. 3 into 10. Within 2 years, I had contracts worth millions. Still, I lived in the same apartment, drove the same car, wore the same thrift store jeans. At family dinners, I let them pay the bill, let them think I was struggling. It was the mask I wore so well they never thought to question it. But behind that mask, the truth grew too big to hide. And one day, it would explode across their perfect dining room like fireworks at midnight. From the outside, my apartment looked like failure dressed in peeling paint and crooked blinds. The Civic sagged in the lot, coughing smoke every morning, and my groceries were packed in wrinkled paper bags that looked like they'd survived a war. Anyone passing by would shake their head and think, "Poor girl, she never figured life out," and I let them think that. I gave them the image they wanted. The story my family had written for me, a failure they could use as gossip over wine and backyard barbecues. Inside, the truth pulsed on the cracked desk where my battered laptop glowed through the night. Contracts scrolled across the screen, signatures from investors in London, Tokyo, San Francisco. The numbers climbed higher every month, commas multiplying until they blurred. I should have moved into a mansion, bought a fleet of cars, thrown my success in their faces. But I didn't. I stayed in that shoebox apartment with its mildew scent and buzzing fluorescent light because invisibility was my weapon. The longer they underestimated me, the more powerful my silence became. There were close calls. One summer afternoon, Mom invited me to brunch at Vanessa's new house, a sprawling place in Paradise Valley, with fountains out front and marble floors that echoed under every step. Vanessa led a tour like she was a realtor, pointing out imported stone and Italian drapes, her heels clicking like applause against her own achievements. Dad clapped her on the back, booming, "See, Hannah. This is what stability looks like." I smiled faintly, hands folded, while inside I burned with the knowledge that a single wire transfer I'd signed that week was worth more than every chandelier in that house combined. At brunch, Dad's old friend cornered me by the buffet, spooning eggs onto his plate. "I think I saw your name in a tech newsletter," he said casually. My pulse spiked, fingers tightening on the china plate. "Something about VR platforms." I cut him off with a laugh. "Must be someone else. Lots of Hannahs out there." He frowned, shrugged, and moved on. I exhaled slowly, my heart pounding like a drum. Too close. Back in my apartment that night, I replayed the moment again and again. How a single slip could have shattered the disguise. Part of me was terrified. Another part reckless, electric, thrilled at how close the truth was to the surface. My secret was growing too big to contain. Some corner of me wanted them to find out, wanted to watch their smug certainty collapse. But not yet. Late nights blurred into dawns. Pizza boxes stacked like trophies, coffee cups lined up like soldiers. My laptop wheezed as though it might explode, the fan screaming while I coded new prototypes. I barely left the apartment except for groceries and cheap gas for the Civic. The world thought I was small, struggling, invisible. But behind the thin walls, I was building something they couldn't even imagine. Then came the email. It was past midnight, the desert outside quiet except for a stray siren echoing down the highway. My screen glowed in the dark room, blue light painting the cracked plaster. I was scrolling through project updates when the notification pinged. Subject: congratulations, Hannah. I clicked, half expecting spam. But it wasn't. The words on the screen froze me in place. You've been selected for Forbes 30 Under 30. Official announcement pending. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge of the desk. My name in black and white attached to recognition people spent whole careers chasing. For a long moment I just stared at it, the silence around me swelling like the desert heat before a storm. Then I did something that might sound strange. I pressed delete. Recognition wasn't the goal, not yet. I wanted the reveal to come on my terms, not through a magazine blurb. Still, after I hit delete, I leaned back in the chair, eyes burning, chest tight, and let the weight of it settle. Proof. The world was beginning to notice. My family hadn't, but soon they wouldn't have a choice. The mask stayed on. At Christmas dinner that year, I parked the Civic crooked outside Vanessa's mansion. She smirked at the dents as she adjusted her diamond bracelet. Mom tutted at my thrift store shoes. Dad sighed when I offered to bring store-brand dessert. They thought I was clinging to scraps, surviving on pity. But inside my purse, contracts worth 7 figures were folded in a leather folder hot from the printer. Neighbors whispered, "She's broke." They didn't know I was negotiating a deal in London. Old classmates bragged about promotions, not realizing their paychecks depended on the very platform I had built. Even Claire, my high school rival, laughed at my car in the grocery lot, never suspecting her company was one of my silent clients. Every insult became fuel. Every dismissive glance was another spark on the fire I was stoking. Secrets have a way of slipping. In tech circles, whispers grew louder. Blog posts speculated about the mysterious founder behind a billion-dollar design platform. Investors dropped my name in interviews. Each time my pulse quickened. Each time I wondered how long I could keep the mask intact. I thought I had more time. I was wrong. One evening, Dad's colleague forwarded him a link. Subject line: "Is this your daughter, Hannah, attached?" was the headline that would change everything. Forbes, America's youngest billionaire, has been living in plain sight. That night, my phone buzzed non-stop with calls I didn't answer. I sat by the window watching the desert sky bleed into twilight, my laptop glowing with confirmation. The lie I'd carried for years had cracked open in a single subject line, and instead of fear, I felt calm. For the first time, I was ready. New Year's Eve was days away. The dining table would gleam again. Vanessa would smirk, Dad would toast, her mom would sigh, and they would all look at me with pity, mocking the Civic, the thrifted shoes, the so-called failure. Let them. Because when midnight came, when the TV anchor spoke my name, the silence that followed would be mine. The Mitchell dining room had always been a stage, and that winter it felt like the script had been rehearsed for decades. Vanessa strutted in wearing a velvet dress that clung like wealth itself, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier's glow. Dad stood at the head of the table, booming about her promotion, sliding his phone across the polished wood so everyone could admire charts glowing on the screen. 9 figures, he announced proudly. The firm couldn't have done it without her. Applause rippled down the table, genuine, loud enough to rattle the crystal. Mom dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Aunts leaned closer, whispering admiration as though Vanessa had discovered electricity. I slipped into my chair quietly, unnoticed, until Aunt Caroline tilted her head toward me, voice sticky with false sweetness. "So, Hannah, still doing your little hobby?" My fork paused midair. Hobby. That word always landed like a stone in my stomach. I forced a small smile, pressed the napkin into my lap until it wrinkled. "It's not just a hobby," I said softly. "I've been building virtual environments, design systems, Vanessa cut in with a laugh sharp enough to slice through me. Virtual reality, again. You're still chasing that honestly at this point, it's just cute. Laughter circled the table, polite but sharp. Uncle David shook his head, raising his glass. Creative spirit, that one. But you can't pay bills with creativity. I pressed my lips together, the edges of my napkin digging into my palms. None of them had clicked the links I sent when tech blogs featured my work. None of them had attended a showcase or read a single article. Yet every time Vanessa so much as sneezed in her firm's direction, they gathered like disciples. I thought back to the one time I invited Mom to a small conference where my startup was pitching. "Not my scene, sweetheart," she said, smoothing my hair. "But Vanessa has a big presentation next week. Maybe we can all go to that." And they did. Every last one of them filled the auditorium, clapping until their hands turned red. I watched the recording online later, counting their faces in the crowd like a punishment. Not one chair had been filled for me. The memory burned hot as Vanessa leaned forward, now pouring herself more wine, grinning, like she'd won a war I hadn't even been allowed to fight. "One day you'll get serious, Hannah. Find something real. Until then, we'll keep cheering you on." She winked. "Everyone needs a hobby." My cheeks heated not with shame but with a steadier fire. That very week I had signed a contract worth more than Vanessa's entire bonus. I wanted to throw it in her face, to lay the papers on the polished wood and watch her smile crumble. Instead, I traced the rim of my plate with the tip of my fork, calm and deliberate. Silence wasn't surrender. It was storage. Later that night, back in my apartment, I sat at my cracked desk, the glow of my screen lighting the dark. Contracts sprawled across the table, numbers with more zeros than my family had ever dreamed I'd touch. The city outside was quiet, but inside I was alive, fingers flying across the keyboard, adrenaline buzzing as Vanessa's laughter replayed in my head. Each word was a wound, but wounds can harden into armor. I leaned back, rubbing tired eyes, and whispered to the empty room, "One day you'll regret this. Not just because of the contracts or the wealth, but because they hadn't stood by me when I was climbing alone." From the outside, I was still the same. Hannah, the civic, coughing smoke in the lot, groceries in beat-up bags, shoes scuffed from years of wear. From the inside, I was signing seven-figure deals, negotiating expansions in Europe, turning nights into empires. And they had no idea. One afternoon months later, Mom invited me to brunch again at Vanessa's house. The excuse this time was Vanessa's new car, a glossy machine parked in the circular driveway like a trophy. They gathered around it as though it were a monument, champagne glasses raised. "Look at this," Dad said proudly, patting the hood. "Success you can see and touch." At the table, Cousin Heather leaned close, smirking. "You should let Vanessa pick your next car. That Civic is embarrassing." Her laugh was high and cruel, echoing off marble walls. I forced a faint smile, adjusting the napkin on my lap. What none of them knew was that earlier that morning I had wired funds for an acquisition in London, more money than this house and car combined. But I said nothing. Because silence was sharper than confession. That night, alone again in my apartment, I scrolled through the email that had arrived just past midnight. Forbes confirmation of publication. Embargo lifts December 3, 1:12:00 a.m. EST. My heart pounded as I read it, then read it again. The faintest smile curved my lips. Let them laugh now. Let them toast Vanessa's car, her mansion, her hollow crowns. In a few weeks, when the world spoke my name, the silence at that table would be louder than any applause Vanessa had ever earned. I closed the laptop and sat still, staring at the cracked ceiling. The clock ticked softly, steady, like a countdown only I could hear. Midnight was coming, and with it the reckoning. Whispers have a way of traveling faster than truth, and by the summer before New Year's Eve, the rumors about me had already started to leak beyond the safe corners I had built. I was at a rooftop mixer in downtown Phoenix when I overheard at first two investors in tailored suits, glasses of bourbon in hand, leaning against the railing. "Whoever's behind Horizon VR," one said, shaking his head, "they're brilliant. Word is it's a woman hiding in plain sight," the other chuckled. Yeah, watch it turn out to be some Stanford wonderkind, or maybe she's nobody, just a front. I stood 3 feet away sipping my club soda invisible. My name perched on the tip of their speculation like a bird that hadn't yet taken flight. That night I lay awake in my shoebox apartment staring at the cracked ceiling pulse strumming. How much longer could I keep this hidden? Each contract, each article in tech blogs, each whisper in the right circles, it was like water pressing against a dam. My family still thought I was struggling, but the rest of the world was circling closer to the truth. The close calls multiplied. One afternoon, Mom invited me to brunch at Vanessa's mansion again. Vanessa had just closed on another vacation home, and Dad wanted everyone to see pictures. I showed up in faded jeans carrying a modest bottle of wine I'd grabbed at the corner store. They barely looked at me until Dad's colleague, a finance consultant, cornered me near the buffet. He spooned eggs onto his plate and said casually, "I think I saw your name in a tech newsletter." Something about VR platforms. My heart slammed. I forced a laugh, waving it off. Must be someone else. Lots of Hannahs in the world. He studied me for a beat too long before shrugging and turning away. I stood there gripping my plate so hard I nearly cracked the china. Back in my apartment that night I replayed it again and again. How close it had been. How a single slip could have shattered everything. The mask was still intact, but the edges were fraying. And part of me, a reckless, dangerous part, wanted it to break. Wanted the truth to smash through their smug certainty and watch the shock on their faces. But not yet. Weeks later, I was in San Francisco, squeezed into a conference room with 3 men in polished suits. The table was littered with laptops, papers, and half-drained coffee cups. The contract in front of me was worth 7 figures. My hands trembled as I slid the final page across. The lead investor studied me for a long moment, then signed his name in deliberate strokes. Just like that, the deal was done. I shook his hand, mine clammy but steady. 2 hours earlier, I had been eating cold noodles at my desk, praying the Civic wouldn't stall on the drive over. Now I was leaving the building with a contract that could rewrite the next decade of my life. Still, when I got back to Phoenix, I parked my coughing Civic in its crooked spot and carried my groceries in those same wrinkled paper bags. To the neighbors, I was still the girl who hadn't figured life out. I needed it that way. Disguise was my strongest armor. But the mask cracked again at Thanksgiving. The house smelled of turkey and cinnamon, relatives packed around the table, their voices buzzing with Vanessa's latest triumph, an Italian vacation and another promotion at her firm. Between bites of stuffing, Uncle David smirked at me. "So Hannah, still scraping by with your little hobby?" The table chuckled, forks clinking. I forced a faint smile, tracing the rim of my plate. What none of them knew was that my company had just closed an international deal that very morning. The wire confirmation was still fresh in my inbox, more zeros than Vanessa's promotion would ever touch. I thought about saying it then. About flipping the table of mockery with a single truth. But timing was everything, and mine wasn't yet. So I stayed silent, let them laugh, let them toast Vanessa's glow while ignoring the fire burning in my own chest. That night I opened my laptop and saw the email that would seal the countdown. Subject: Forbes, congratulations Hannah. Embargo lifts December 3, 11200 a.m. EST. I read it twice, 3 times, my breath catching in my throat. The world was going to know, not in whispers or rumors, but in headlines. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen painting my face. Soon, I whispered into the empty room. They'll see soon. The dam was about to burst. And when it did, it wouldn't just wash away their laughter. It would drown the legacy they had built on my exclusion. The chandelier glowed warm above the Mitchell dining room, but the warmth never reached me. It was early December, and the table was set as though the night itself was meant to be photographed for a magazine. Crystal glasses, silver polished so bright it nearly blinded, plates stacked high with turkey and potatoes. Vanessa sat in the center, pearls swinging as she talked loudly about her firm's expansion in Italy. Dad nodded with his chest puffed out, pride swelling across his face like a banner he wanted everyone to see. I slid into my chair quietly, almost invisible. For a moment I thought maybe the night would pass with me in the background, just another shadow at the edge of their glow. But Aunt Caroline broke the illusion first. She tilted her head, voice syrupy. "So Hannah, still tinkering with your hobby?" The word landed heavy like always. Hobby? My fork froze midair. "It's not just a hobby," I said softly. "I've been building environment systems." Vanessa's laugh cut me off before I could finish. "Virtual reality. Again. You're still chasing that." "Honestly, it's getting sad." Her smirk glinted in the light, sharp as glass. Laughter circled the table, polite but pointed. Uncle David raised his glass, chuckling. "Creative spirit, sure, but you can't pay bills with creativity." I pressed my napkin flat against my lap until the fabric wrinkled in my hands. What none of them knew was that just last week I had signed a deal bigger than Vanessa's entire bonus. But I said nothing. Silence wasn't weakness. It was a blade. Mom tried to soften the blow with a sigh. "We just want you settled, sweetheart. By now you should have something steady. You can't chase ideas forever." She made the word ideas sound like a curse, as though dreams themselves were contagious. Vanessa raised her glass high. "To making the right choices," she declared. The clinking of crystals followed laughter, rising again. My glass stayed on the table. I didn't need to join. Cousin Heather smirked across the table, her lipstick catching the glow. "You should let Vanessa pick out your next car. That Civic of yours is embarrassing." More chuckles. Dad leaned back, shaking his head like he pitied me. "Even in a lifetime, Hannah, you'll never catch up to your sister." I traced the rim of my plate with the tip of my fork, breathing steady, face calm. They thought their words pierced me, but all they did was harden into steel. The room buzzed with their cheer for Vanessa, for her vacations, for her bonuses. I sat still, quiet, remembering the email glowing in my inbox. Forbes' youngest billionaire of the year. Announcement scheduled December 3, 11200 a.m. EST. I had read it 100 times, my heartbeat ticking like a clock with every glance. I looked around the table at faces that had never shown up for me. Not once had they filled the chairs at my conferences. Not once had they read the articles, clicked the links, cared enough to see past their favorite narrative. Every toast for Vanessa was another nail in the story they loved to tell, the golden child and the failure. But the truth was already written, waiting to surface at midnight on New Year's Eve. They didn't know it, but they were cheering at a funeral. Their version of me would be buried that night, and the silence that followed would be mine. When dessert was served, Heather leaned forward again, unable to resist one last jab. "So tell me, Hannah, how do you even afford to be here tonight? Do you need someone to cover your part of the bill?" The room roared with laughter, raw and unrestrained. I placed my glass down, carefully folded my napkin, and smiled faintly. Let them laugh. Let them believe their cruelty was clever. Because every chuckle was another step closer to the reckoning. That night, back in my apartment, I stared at the email one more time. My reflection shimmered faint in the screen's glow eyes, steady lips curved in a sharper smile than I'd worn at the table. "Laugh while you can," I whispered. "In 3 weeks, the world will know." The countdown wasn't on the TV. It was inside me. And I was ready. The desert nights in Scottsdale grew sharper as December crept toward its end, the air crisp enough to sting my lungs when I stepped outside. I walked to my Civic, parked crooked in the lot, the same car they loved to mock, and for a second I almost laughed. If only they knew this rusted piece of metal had carried me to meetings where signatures worth millions slid across polished tables. If only they knew the girl behind the wheel was already on Forbes's list, scheduled to be revealed at midnight on New Year's Eve. But they didn't know, not yet. And every day that passed, the whispers outside my family's walls grew louder. Tech blogs speculated about the mystery founder of Horizon VR. Investors dropped hints in interviews, marveling at a platform that had reshaped design across 3 continents. One journalist even wrote, "Whoever she is, She's about to become one of the most powerful women in tech. I read the words late at night, blue light burning my tired eyes, and smiled. They were circling closer, and soon the spotlight I had avoided for years would no longer be optional. Margaret Lewis, my mentor, called the week before Christmas. Her voice was warm but firm, the way only she could manage. "I hope you're ready, Hannah," she said. "Forbes isn't just recognition, it's exposure. They'll all know. I want them to know," I admitted. "Especially my family." She chuckled softly, like she'd been waiting to hear me say that. "You don't need to prove them wrong, you already did. But sometimes the sweetest revenge is letting the truth speak for itself." I hung up, staring out at the faint glow of Christmas lights strung across my neighbor's balcony. She was right, but still a hunger stirred inside me. I didn't just want the truth to speak. I wanted it to echo. The group chat with my family buzzed constantly. Photos of Vanessa's mansion decorated like a holiday postcard, dads bragging about a new vacation rental in Sedona, mom asking who was bringing what to New Year's Eve dinner. My phone lit up with their pride for one another, their exclusion of me woven between every line. When I offered to bring dessert, Dad replied, "Vanessa's catering sweetheart. Just bring yourself." The pity dripped heavier than insult. Meanwhile, on my laptop, I was finalizing a deal to open a Horizon VR office in Singapore. The contract sat bold on the screen. Signatures lined up neatly, another expansion that would ripple across markets they couldn't even pronounce. I stared at both screens, the family chat glowing with their shallow victories, and the contract shimmering with undeniable proof, and felt the divide stretch wider than it ever had. Maya dropped by one evening, bundled in a red coat, her hair tucked under a wool beanie. She looked around my cramped apartment, the same peeling paint and buzzing light she'd seen for years, and shook her head. "Hannah, you could buy a mansion bigger than Vanessa's tomorrow. Why are you still here?" I laughed softly, pouring her tea into chipped mugs. "Because the reveal has to happen on my terms. On the night they'll never forget." Her eyes narrowed. "You mean New Year's Eve?" I nodded. "Midnight. That's when Forbes goes live." She leaned back, a slow grin spreading across her face. "You're going to let them mock you one last time." "One last time," I echoed. The thought didn't sting. It thrilled. Christmas came and went, another round of polite jabs disguised as jokes. Vanessa's gifts lined the tree like trophies, designer bags, glittering jewelry, vacations booked with airline vouchers. Mine were small, practical things, as though they couldn't imagine me deserving more. A sweater 2 sizes too big. A cookbook I'd never use. Mom's smile when I unwrapped them was the same as always, gentle, dismissive, safe. But at night alone I returned to the email. Subject: Forbes, youngest billionaire of the year. Announcement scheduled December 3, 11200 a.m. EST. My heart raced each time I read it, like a countdown hidden inside me. The closer it drew, the more reckless my thoughts became. Part of me wanted to walk into Vanessa's mansion and drop the news myself, to watch the smirks slide off their faces before the cameras confirmed it. But I knew the silence of their mockery at midnight, cut open by the voice of a TV anchor, would be sweeter than anything I could say. December 30th, the city buzzed with anticipation. Shops glittered with holiday sales, couples carried champagne bottles in brown bags, strangers filled the sidewalks with laughter. I walked past them with my hood pulled low, invisible among the crowd. The world was hours away from knowing my name, but in that moment I was still just the quiet Mitchell girl, the one they pitied, the one they mocked. I bought myself a single gold bracelet from a jeweler downtown, slipped it onto my wrist, and watched it glint under the shop lights. A private gift, a reminder, not for them, for me. That night, lying awake in bed, I whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow night, everything changes." My phone buzzed on the nightstand, Vanessa's message in the family chat. "Can't wait to see everyone tomorrow. Hannah, don't be late this time." I smiled at the screen, a sharp, knowing smile. "Don't worry, Vanessa," I thought. "I'll be right on time." Because when midnight struck, the world would be watching, and for the first time in my life, the Mitchell dining room would fall silent, Not because I had nothing to say, but because the truth had finally arrived. The morning of December 31st broke with a chill that cut straight through the Arizona sun, sharper than the winter air should have been. I woke in my small apartment blinds, tilted just enough to let in a strip of light across the floor, and for a moment I just lay there staring at the ceiling. Today wasn't just New Year's Eve, it was the day everything shifted. By midnight, the truth I'd carried in silence for years would blaze across every screen in America. The email had come just after dawn. I'd left my laptop open on the desk, contracts scattered around it, coffee rings staining the edges. When I rubbed sleep from my eyes and walked over, the glow of the screen stopped me cold. Subject: confirming publication. Forbes youngest billionaire of the year. Scheduled for December 3/11/2000 AMEST. I read it once, twice. My hands shook the third time. I'd waited for this moment in secret, picturing it again and again. Now it was real, stamped with an exact hour, a promise the world could not ignore. I brewed coffee, the cheap grounds filling the air with their bitter scent, and dialed Maya. She answered groggily, her voice muffled against a pillow. "You sound wired. What's wrong?" "It's confirmed," I said. "Forbes goes live tonight, midnight." That woke her instantly. "Hannah, you're serious." As serious as it gets. Her laughter burst through the line, bright and sharp. "They have no idea what's about to hit them." I smiled, though it trembled at the edges. "No, but by this time tomorrow, they'll never see me the same way again." After the call, I dressed slowly, deliberately. Black jeans, a white blouse, nothing fancy. On the surface, I'd look like the same Hannah, who always showed up underdressed to family events, the same girl they teased about thrift stores and secondhand shoes. But under my wrist cuff, the gold bracelet I'd bought the day before glinted faintly, a private reminder of the empire they couldn't see. I spent the morning combing through contracts, the numbers glowing on my screen like a secret language. Another expansion deal closed in Europe. Licensing agreements in Singapore, enough to double Marcus's entire firm's yearly revenue. My father used to say daughters like me should aim for stability, not ambition. He'd told me I'd never own a place, never amount to more than a line on a family tree. Tonight, that line would etch itself in history. By late afternoon, I packed a single overnight bag. Not for clothes, just my laptop, the Forbes confirmation, and a few documents I wanted closed when the story broke. If Vanessa asked why I carried it, I'd shrug and say I was freelancing. Let her laugh one last time. The drive to her mansion was long, the Civic rattling in protest with every mile. Houses along the way sparkled with Christmas lights, neighbors stringing fresh garlands for their New Year's parties. I kept both hands on the wheel, my heart pounding to the rhythm of the turn signal as I pulled into Vanessa's pristine driveway. Her two-car garage gleamed, the new SUV polished to a mirror. I parked my battered Honda at the far end, half expecting her to sneer about it before the night was over. Inside, the house buzzed with energy. Chandeliers glowed, music spilled from hidden speakers. Cousins milled about in sequins, and pressed suits glasses clinking already hours before midnight. The smell of roasted lamb and truffle oil wrapped around me, heavy and deliberate. Vanessa's stage, as always. "Look who finally made it," she called from across the foyer, a glass of champagne in her hand. Her lips curved into that smile, polite enough for guests, sharp enough for me. "I was starting to think your Civic wouldn't survive the trip." Laughter rippled among nearby relatives. I forced a small smile slipping out of my coat. "It made it just fine." Dad clapped me on the shoulder too firmly, like his approval was a gift he could choose to bestow. "Glad you could join us, sweetheart." Vanessa's really outdone herself tonight. His eyes gleamed with pride for her, not for me. The evening unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Marcus, Vanessa's husband, launched into stories about his latest business deals. Relatives oohed and ahed over the Italian marble in her kitchen. Aunt Louise bragged about her grandson's law school admission. Each time the conversation dipped near me, someone would throw a barbed question wrapped in silk. "So Hannah," Uncle Tom said, swirling bourbon in his glass. "Still working on those little computer projects of yours? Still scraping by with freelance gigs?" added Heather, Vanessa's friend, her pearls catching the chandelier light. I nodded politely, my answers clipped. "Something like that." They chuckled, knowingly smug in their assumptions. I let them. Every cruel laugh was fuel. Every jab was a note in the symphony that would collapse at midnight. Dinner stretched long, each course more elaborate than the last. But no dish satisfied me like the thought of what was coming. I kept my phone, closed the screen dark, but ready, the confirmation email glowing behind it like a promise. By 11, the countdown energy filled the house. Guests gathered in the living room, champagne flutes in hand, eyes on the flat-screen TV mounted above the fireplace. The news channel flickered with coverage from Times Square, crowds cheering, balloons swaying. Vanessa preened in her sequin dress, ready for the midnight kiss with Marcus. Dad tapped his watch, calling out, 10 minutes. I sat near the end of the sofa, calm, silent. My heart thudded, but my face was still. They thought I was waiting for the same thing they were for a ball drop, for another year to begin. They had no idea I was waiting for the news anchor's voice to slice their laughter into silence. At 11:55, Heather leaned across the cushions. "Hannah, do you even have champagne? Or should someone spot you a glass?" The room laughed. Light but cruel, echoing with the confidence of people certain they knew the ending of my story. Dad raised his flute. "Some things never change," he joked. "Our Hannah still poor, still dreaming." I smiled then, a small, sharp smile they didn't understand. "We'll see," I murmured. The seconds ticked down. 11:58. 11:59. Vanessa pressed closer to Marcus, her laughter spilling too loud. The room swelled with anticipation. Glasses lifted, voices counted down. 10, 9, 8. The TV anchor's voice boomed crisp over the roar of New York crowds. As we ring in the new year, we also honor those who defined it. Tonight, Forbes has named the youngest billionaire of the year. My chest rose with a steady breath. Hannah Mitchell, founder and CEO of Horizon VR. The words crashed into the room like thunder. Silence followed, thick and absolute. Glasses froze midair. Dad's jaw slackened. Vanessa's smile cracked into disbelief. Marcus blinked as though he'd misheard. I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, the smile on my lips calm, deliberate. They didn't need me to say a word. The truth had arrived on its own, and it was louder than anything I could have ever spoken. The TV anchor's voice still echoed in the room long after the announcement ended, as though the walls themselves refused to let it go. Hannah Mitchell, founder and CEO of Horizon VR, Forbes' youngest billionaire. My name shimmered on the ticker at the bottom of the screen, scrolling over and over, undeniable. No one moved. Champagne glasses hung frozen in midair, bubbles rising to nowhere. The music from Times Square blared through the speakers, but in Vanessa's living room it was smothered by silence, so heavy it pressed on every chest. Heather was the first to break. She let out a laugh, high-pitched, desperate. "That has to be some mistake. Right, Hannah? I mean, you..." Her words dangled brittle and weak. I lifted my glass slowly, letting the golden fizz catch the chandelier light, and finally spoke. No mistake. The sound of my voice was calm, measured, but it carried like a bell in the stillness. All eyes turned toward me, searching for a crack, some hint that this was a cruel prank. Dad cleared his throat, his face flushed red, his hand tightening on the stem of his glass. "Is this true? You let us think you were struggling." I met his eyes. "I never said I was struggling. You assumed it. You wanted to believe it." Marcus shifted in his seat, his usual smirk gone, replaced by something tighter. Anger, shame, maybe fear. "Why wouldn't you tell us? Why keep this a secret?" I set my glass down with deliberate care. "Because silence is sharper than argument. And because tonight," I gestured toward the glowing screen, "was always going to be sweeter than anything I could have said." The weight of it landed. I watched their faces crumble one by one. Vanessa's lips parted, her hand trembling as she reached for Marcus's arm. "But But you drive that old car. You live in that tiny apartment. I leaned back, calm, almost pitying. Appearances can be useful. Heather's pearls shifted against her collarbone as she shook her head, muttering, I don't believe this. Uncle Tom dropped his glass with a clatter against the coffee table, spilling champagne across the polished wood. His voice was rough. Billionaire Hannah, you're saying you've been sitting here letting us mock me? I finished for him, my voice slicing clean. Yes. Year after year I let you laugh. I let you call me poor, a failure, a burden. And every insult became fuel. Aunt Louise covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. But, Forbes, that's undeniable, I said. The screen continued to flash images, now my photograph at a conference, Horizon VR's headquarters in San Francisco, a headline about international expansion. Proof layered over proof. There was no room left for doubt. Dad's voice came again, quieter this time. The edge stripped away. Why didn't you come to us? We could have supported you. I laughed, softly shaking my head. Supported me. The night I told you I wanted to build something new, you cut me off. You told me stability mattered more than ideas. You wanted Marcus's path, not mine, so I built it without you. The silence that followed was different now, not stunned disbelief but shame. Marcus slammed his glass down, his jaw clenched. This changes nothing. You think money makes you better than us, I looked at him steady. No. What makes me better is that I never needed to step on you to rise. But you built your confidence on keeping me small. His face twisted, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. Mom's voice cracked, brittle as glass. Hannah, darling, we're proud of you. Truly. We didn't know. I held her gaze unblinking. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. The room was suffocating now, thick, with the weight of their own cruelty reflected back at them. I could see it in their faces, the realization of every missed chance to stand beside me, every moment they chose to mock instead of believe. The waiter reappeared then, as though summoned by the silence. He carried a tray with a single bottle of Dom Perignon, the kind Dad had bragged about for years but never bought. He stopped beside me and bowed slightly. Your usual arrangement, Miss Mitchell. Gasps rippled through the room. Dad's face drained of color. Vanessa blinked rapidly, confusion breaking across her polished mask. Yes, I said, my voice calm. Bring it out. The waiter poured into crystal flutes one by one, his movements deliberate. He saved mine for last. The fizz rose in my glass, catching the candlelight, and when I raised it, every eye followed. For years you told me I'd never own a place, that I was poor, a failure. Tonight you finally see the truth. My voice carried into every corner, steady as steel. I drank slow and deliberate. Around me they lifted their glasses, reluctantly trembling hands, swallowing champagne that burned more from regret than bubbles. The chandelier glowed overhead, the screens flickered with headlines, and for the first time in my life the Mitchell family table belonged to me. The chandelier swayed slightly above the long dining table, its golden light scattering across crystal and silver. No one touched their food anymore. The lamb once paraded as Vanessa's triumph sat untouched, growing cold. Every face around me was fixed in the same expression, a mixture of disbelief, shame, and fear. For once, not a single smirk remained. I placed my glass down carefully, the faint click echoing like a gavel striking wood. So I began, my voice low but carrying, this is the part where you all scrambled to rewrite history, to pretend you always believed in me. No one spoke. Even Heather, who had always thrived on filling silence with her sharp little comments, sat rigid, her lips pressed tight. I turned my eyes first to my father. You told me stability mattered more than ideas. You said I'd never own a place, never succeed with anything that wasn't Marcus's path. Do you remember that? His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching at the edge of his cheek. I was trying to protect you. The world is cruel. No, I cut in sharply. The world is cruel, yes, but you were worse. You weren't protecting me, you were dismissing me. You crushed dreams because they didn't look like the ones you wanted to brag about. He flinched, his shoulders sagging slightly, as though the words pressed down with the weight of years. My gaze shifted to Mom. She twisted her pearls, her fingers trembling against the string. "Sweetheart, we only wanted what was best." "What was best for Marcus," I said coldly. "Always Marcus." His report cards framed his games, celebrated his internships, toasted with champagne. And me? My wins were folded into drawers or brushed aside with a smile and a, "That's nice, Hannah." Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes shimmered with something that wanted to be tears, but the years of habit kept them dry. I turned to Vanessa. She had been quiet since the announcement, her sequin dress catching the light like broken glass. Her chin lifted finally, but her voice shook. "We teased you, Hannah, but we never meant. You never meant for me to rise," I snapped. "You loved me small. You needed me small so you could shine brighter. That's why you called me poor tonight, why you laughed when Dad said I'd never own a place. You all enjoyed it. You feasted on it." Her face paled, her lipstick cracking at the corners of her mouth. Then I let my eyes fall on Marcus. He had been silent the longest, his fingers tapping against the stem of his glass, his jaw grinding. He looked at me now, defiance flickering in his eyes. "Money doesn't erase the past, Hannah. You think this makes you better than us?" I leaned forward slightly, my voice sharp as a blade. "I don't need to be better than you, Marcus. I already built something you can't touch. What I do have is proof that every time you mocked me, every time you laughed at my so-called little projects, you were wrong. And deep down, you know it." He shifted uncomfortably, his confidence cracking, but still he held my gaze. I saw the fury there, the unraveling pride. I straightened, letting my gaze sweep across all of them. "You want to know why I never told you? Why I stayed silent while you mocked me?" No one answered. The air was thick, waiting. "Because family is supposed to stand beside you even when you fail. You didn't. Not one of you. You only wanted me at this table if I was the punchline. So I let you have your laughter year after year. But I built something in the shadows, something that would outlast every insult. Tonight isn't just about money, it's about truth." Aunt Louise finally spoke, her voice small, almost childlike. "We didn't know." I shook my head. "You didn't want to know, that's the difference." The waiter returned, silent as ever, refilling glasses. His calm movements made their trembling hands look even weaker. He set the bottle down, gently bowed his head to me, and left without a word. The respect in his gesture was sharper than any insult I had endured from my own blood. Uncle Tom tried to break the tension with a forced laugh. "Well, Hannah, maybe we could work together. Keep it in the family, eh? Investments, partnerships." I almost laughed, but what came out was colder. Keep it in the family. The same family that mocked me for years, called me broke, dismissed me as a failure. That family. He shifted in his chair, his grin faltering. "Business is business." "Not tonight," I interrupted. I pushed my chair back then, the scrape of wood against marble loud and final. Every head turned, every eye wide. I rose slowly, steady, champagne flute still in hand. "Let me make this clear," I said, my voice ringing against the walls. "I don't owe you forgiveness. I don't owe you partnership. And I certainly don't owe you the comfort of pretending you always believed in me. I built this empire without you, and I will continue without you." The words landed like stones dropped into deep water, pulling the room into silence again. Their shame was thick, tangible, clinging to their faces, shrinking them smaller in their chairs. Dad's fist tightened around his silverware, his knuckles white. Mom blinked rapidly, as though she could blink herself into another reality. Vanessa sat stiff, her sequins dull now under the chandelier. Marcus looked pale, stripped of his bravado. Heather's smirk was gone entirely, her lips parted but speechless. I lifted my glass one last time. "Here's to truth, the kind you can't laugh away." I drank slow and deliberate. No one followed. When I set the glass down again, I added almost casually, "And tomorrow the rest of the world will know too." The silence deepened, suffocating. Not disbelief anymore, shame thick and undeniable. For the first time at that table, I wasn't the quiet one. I was the only one in control. The scrape of my chair against the marble floor rang like thunder in the suffocating silence. No one moved as I stood smoothing my blouse with deliberate calm. Their eyes followed me, desperate, bewildered, but not one of them dared speak. For the first time in my life, their power over me had dissolved. I walked slowly toward the double doors at the end of the dining hall, each step sharp against the polished floor. Behind me I heard frantic whispers, Dad's low growl, Mom's trembling attempts at softness, Vanessa's high-pitched murmur, Marcus's sharp inhale, as though he might still salvage his pride. But none of it mattered anymore. Their words no longer reached me. The waiter appeared as if on cue, his posture straight, his voice calm. "We're honored to have you here tonight, Miss Mitchell." I met his gaze, gave him a faint nod. That simple respect from a stranger carried more weight than every hollow compliment my family had ever tossed my way. The doors opened and cool night air swept against my skin like freedom. The December sky stretched wide above the city lights shimmering in the distance. My breath frosted in the air, and for the first time in years I inhaled, without the weight of expectation pressing on my chest. My driver stood at the curb beside a sleek black sedan. He opened the door with a respectful nod. I lingered a moment on the top step, glancing back at the glowing windows of Vanessa's mansion. Shadows moved inside, frantic and broken, their silhouettes darting like trapped birds. They could spin whatever story they wanted, now claim ignorance, invent excuses, pretend pride, but the truth had already left the room with me. I stepped into the car, the leather soft beneath me. The door shut with a quiet finality, sealing the past behind me. The engine hummed, headlights cutting through the dark as the mansion receded in the rearview mirror. As we drove, I thought of all the nights that had led me here. The shoebox apartment with roaches scattering, when the lights flicked on the Civic coughing smoke in the winter cold, the pizza boxes stacked high beside a wheezing laptop. I thought of every insult I'd swallowed in silence, every time they laughed while I smiled, and let them believe they'd won. They hadn't. Those moments had sharpened me, turned wounds into armor, silence into power. The car slowed at a red light downtown. Outside, strangers in sequined dresses and paper hats laughed on the sidewalk, fireworks already cracking faintly in the distance. None of them knew me yet tonight. Many of them would see my name on their screens. The thought didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like release. Maya called just after midnight, her voice crackling with excitement. "It's everywhere, Hannah. Your face, your company, your story. People are calling you the future of tech." I smiled faintly, watching the city blur past the window. "Let them call me whatever they want. I know who I am. Did they see it? Your family?" "Oh, they saw it," I said softly. "And they'll never forget it." The car turned onto a wide boulevard lined with neon signs, their colors flashing across the glass. I leaned back, letting the rhythm of the road steady me. My family's laughter, their mockery, their disbelief, they had fed me for years. Now their silence fed me more. When we reached my apartment, I didn't go inside right away. I stood on the curb, the city alive around me, and looked up at the stars faint against the glow. My breath curled in the cold night air, and I whispered the words I had carried for years. The sweetest revenge is being undeniable. It wasn't about champagne flutes or headlines anymore. It was about knowing that I had risen on my own terms, that I had built something no amount of favoritism or mockery could erase. They could rewrite their stories however they wanted, but the truth was carved into the world now. I walked up the steps, unlocked my door, and paused once more, glancing back at the street alive with strangers celebrating the new year. In a way, I was celebrating too, not just the year ahead, but the years I had survived to get here. Inside, my laptop glowed faintly on the desk, emails flooding in, investors, journalist partners from across the world. I closed it gently, choosing instead to sit by the window with a cup of tea. Outside, fireworks burst into the sky, scattering gold and red across the night. I thought of Rachel's words from years ago, whispered at a dinner table when she was the only one who had dared to defend me. "They'll regret it one day." She had been right. Tonight they did. And so I ask you, if your own family mocked you, dismissed, you told you that you were nothing, what would you do when you finally rose? Would you forgive them? Would you let them rewrite the story they once used against you? Or would you let your silence, your success speak louder than anything they could ever say? If you felt that sting, if you've ever been underestimated by those who should have believed in you, I want to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. And if you want more stories like mine, of revenge, of reckoning, of truth revealed, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes the tables do turn. And when they do, the silence of those who doubted you is the loudest sound of all.